here we are. I'm Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next, the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I am talking with Nathan Carson, one half of synth punk duo Point Line Plane, who have recently reformed on the back of a remastered reissue of their debut eponymous record, which is being put out for the first time on vinyl, as well as digitally and also CD, on SKiN GRAFT Records. And to say that Point Line Plane is back together would suggest that they are doing more than re-releasing their debut album. And indeed, this is true, because they have started to playing shows together for the first time in over 20 years, I do believe. They have played a couple of shows together this month, and they have also been playing some shows with the recently also reformed Dazzling Killmen, who they will be playing with later on in June. In fact, I believe there are 3 shows coming up. One in Madison, Wisconsin on the 5th, one in Chicago on the 6th, and then they're going to be playing the last date of Caterwall Fest on the 7th of June. And if you're interested in finding out more about Caterwall, then stay tuned. Not today, but something coming up. There you go. And other than that, today is all things Point Line Plane. In fact, not just here, but I'm not sure exactly what time it's going to go up, but you will be able to go to Ghost Cult magazine and find a news story there about the reissue of the band's debut album, and there will be an exclusive stream where you can listen to the whole album a day in advance, and a very worthwhile experience that is too, I must say. Anywho, I'm here with Nathan to discuss the history of the band, their music, some of the time before and after, or before and between, I suppose, the life of Point Line Plane, and also touching on Nathan's work with his booking agency, Nanotear. And that, I think, is all that needs to be said. You can follow me at Tom Osman Sounds. You can go to my website, tomosmansounds.com, for my music. I'm on Bandcamp, I'm on Ampwall, links in the description, yada, yada, yada. Point Line Plane, follow them, listen to their music, buy some music, support the band, go see them live, etc., etc. And on that, I will say, Nathan Carson of Point Line Plane and Nanotear Booking, take it away. Well, maybe then, to start with on that topic, tell me about the shows that you just played.
Sure. So 2 weeks ago, we played a couple of shows in Mid-Valley, Oregon, because it was the first shows we played in 21 years. And so we went to Eugene and Salem, Oregon to, play for friends and family in the Mid-Valley and shake the rust of 21 years off. And that went well. And on Thursday, the 14th of May, we met with the Dazzling Killmen up in Vancouver, BC, and played our first real big city, like a serious market show. And that was amazing because people had driven in from rural British Columbia that were fans. There were people crowd surfing. There were people falling onto the stage. It wasn't a big crowd, but it was a very enthusiastic and responsive crowd. And also, it was my first time getting to see Dazzling Killmen live. I've been listening to them since 1997, and they broke up in 94. So I had narrowly missed them originally and had always wished that I hadn't. And so it was very, very cool to get to see and meet them. And then we hit Seattle on Friday night, and then Portland on Saturday, which is our hometown show, homecoming after all this time. The last time we played Portland was 2005 as well. And I mean, I definitely pulled out all the stops to get our friends to come out from those days. Besides the online marketing and the social media, I went through my phone and sent hundreds of text messages to old friends and fans. And it's a lot of people who I maybe see once a year or something, but they were all in one room together. And you could just see how delighted they were and remembering the songs, because they are very memorable songs, which I'm really proud of. They're melodic and they're hooky, even though it's like aggressive at times and noisy and weird. We really wanted to write music that was memorable and had hooks. And so seeing the recognition from people that maybe haven't even listened to the record in many years, but it really, I think we took them back to a really fun time in Portland and in the music scene in general. And I know that my bandmate Josh said he had to sneak away and have a couple of cries just because of the emotions involved with doing it again and seeing so many of our friends in one place at one time. It was a really special night, and it really couldn't have gone better. And also the venue we played at, Mississippi Studios, is just, it's such a classy room, and the quality of the sound and the staff was really over the top. If it says anything, when Shellac was still touring, Steve Albini would book 2 or 3 nights at Mississippi Studios rather than playing a larger room because he liked it so much.
Oh, well, that does definitely say something. So
Yeah.
what was it like for you to revisit that music on stage after all that time? And how did it sort of compare to your expectations?
Well, it's so much fun, and it's really nice being a duo. You know, you have one melodic instrument and one rhythm instrument, so tuning is no longer an issue. I mean, not that it generally is with keyboards anyway, but you don't have to worry about people being in tune with each other. Like, we just have to have this telepathic communication to make this music, and we still have that intact, though good monitors certainly help. I guess the biggest thing for me personally is that most of the last 20 years I've been playing in a heavy doom metal band called Witch Mountain. And a lot of people came up to me afterwards saying, "Wow, I've never seen you play more than 90 BPM before." And in Point Line playing, there's a lot of fast, intricate things going on. And I really sort of had to retrain myself how to play fast music like that. And, definitely people have also come up and said, "I have ADHD and this music is really helpful for me because it's always something new happening every couple of seconds and it really engages them." And that's fun too. So, yeah, I mean, it's been a bit of a process for me just physically getting back into a shape where I could play fast and crazy music. But we've rehearsed for a couple of months, and playing these shows day after day after day this week was also really helpful because in the old days we toured extensively and we're always on the road. And so we were kind of always tour tight. And I think Saturday night was the first time where we felt that was really coming back to us.
And I think I read something somewhere that I don't know how often this was the case, but you played a lot of shows that were about 20 minutes long. Was that like the norm for you?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes as little as 12 minutes. I think we wanted to make a noise and make an impression on people. And a lot of the songs are pretty short. I mean, some of them are under 2 minutes long. And we just felt like if we hit them hard and fast and then got out of the way, that was often a way to make an impression and bring people back for more. Now we're doing 40 minutes, which is something we really never did back in the day, but it's a retrospective set and we're covering a lot of ground and we're in a different phase of our lives and career. So I think it's appropriate. We're not in our 20s and just playing on the floor and in our underwear, as often happened back then. So yeah, I think it was just about making an impression on people, and sometimes 20 minutes was all it took.
So obviously we're here to talk about your debut self-titled record, which is getting a reissue, a remastered reissue on SKiN GRAFT Records. I understand that you and Josh remained friends after Point Line Plane first split up, but maybe you can tell me a bit the story of why you split up and what the impetus was to get back together.
Sure. Well, being a duo and being two kind of young go-getters, we were able to accomplish a lot in a very short time. We had been friends for years, and we were sort of the unofficial managers of our own bands prior to that. And in 2001, we both found ourselves with the free time to start a project together. And we were able to accomplish a lot in a short time because normally when a show opportunity comes up, it's sort of like reaching out to the committee and checking everybody's schedules and making sure it works. Whereas for he and I, it was like, are you available on this day? Yes, good, I'll book it. Boom. Like that's it. It's just two people. And neither of us had normal jobs holding us back. Neither of us had, wives or children, or even, I don't even know if we had pets at that time. Josh was often kind of couch surfing around that time. So, he didn't even necessarily have a permanent residence. We did 148 shows and 3 albums and a bunch of comp tracks in 3 years, from 2002 to 2005. We're very prolific and very busy. And the last tour was kind of long and arduous. It did end with a really strong week on the West Coast. We played in LA with High on Fire and San Francisco with 400 Blows. But by the end of it, we were pretty exhausted. It didn't seem like our efforts were turning it into a career necessarily. Although in hindsight, now that I know a lot more about the music industry, it takes more than 3 years to get to that place. But I think that we were a little young and anxious and felt like we had done so much and worked so hard and had only gotten so far. And right at that time, we had both gotten into serious relationships, and Josh finally had a permanent residence. And it just kind of felt like it was time to shift our priorities to something else. There was no big blowout. We've been great friends the entire time. Obviously, I wish we had continued or maybe taken 6 months off and regrouped, but that's not what happened. I also thought we might come back to it sooner than 21 years later, but that's also how it happened. Last September, Josh texted me. He said, I had a dream that we reunited. And I said, sounds good. I'll start booking some shows. And once again, it was that easy to make things happen. And again, we're both have other projects that are sort of on life support right now. And so we had time in our schedules, and we're just people who always want to be making music.
Yeah.
So
Oh, hello. He or
this is
she?
this she's Bree Ty, named for the
Britai.
Robotech character.
Oh, bless her heart. How old is she?
She's young. She is born last July, so however that adds up, that's like 8 months, something like that.
Is she an outdoor cat?
Not yet, but she sure wants to be.
Oh yeah.
And we have a fenced backyard, and we're going to start letting them out soon. But
Nice. So we've talked about your I guess other current-ish project, Witch Mountain, or current in
mhm.
recent times, your Doom project, and Point Line Plane is obviously quite different. Tell me about Moon Patrol.
Cool. I'm glad that you even know about that. Moon Patrol was I guess for lack of a better term, I could call it new wave, just because we had short, upbeat songs with catchy pop sensibilities, but it was still like underground and garagey. It was based out of the small town, college town of Corvallis, Oregon, and we were around from 95 to 97. But it was kind of the first time I really experienced this microcosm of success where 100 kids would come to our shows and sing along, and we'd be walking down the street and someone would ride by on their bike and yell Moon Patrol. And then my favorite was I was in the basement of the courthouse paying my water bill, and this woman turns around to me and goes, my kids love you guys. And so we were having a really good run. It was the first band I was in that really started playing out of town. We came up to Portland a lot to play support to national acts, and that was a new thing, for me at the time. And so we all collectively as a group decided to move to Portland in 1997. And really shortly after we moved to Portland, our main guitar player, who was the oldest and the guy who wrote all the music, just kind of made things impossible for us to continue with him. And so the rest of us morphed into a darker, more no wave act called Bishop of Battle. But the other thing about Moon Patrol is we played some Portland shows with Josh's early post-high school band Delano. and we got to be friends and we're mutual admirers of each other's work. And that's how our friendship started, was playing gigs together with Moon Patrol and Delano.
So I read in one of the interviews that you helpfully sent me links for that you're a big birthday party fan, which I also
Yeah.
am. Having mentioned the no wave connection, when I think of no wave, I tend to either think of Swans, who were kind of a bit sort of like later no wave, or Lydia Lunch or James
Hmm.
Chance, maybe, as some of those people. So what was the kind of no wave influence for you in particular?
Well, I was in that college town of Corvallis in high school, and our public library had the No New York Comp LP, and we would check that out and record it onto cassette. And we were being exposed to that in high school. And likewise, there was a really cool independent record store in Corvallis called Happy Trails that a lot of college dropouts worked at, and they spotted precocious kids like me and would say, "Hey, kid, you need to hear The Birthday Party. You need to hear Big Black. This is The Naked City. This is Carcass and Bolt Thrower." And so, even though I was in a somewhat isolated place, we were getting cultured because there was college radio and access to really cool records. And records were cheap back then. You know, a used LP was $3 to $5, and so we would go in and haunt the new arrivals section and look for interesting things. So I was hearing Swans and Sonic Youth and The Birthday Party in high school, and especially there's that Pleasure Heads Must Burn birthday party concert video, and seeing that, I think for other people it would have been like seeing footage of the Stooges or something like that. It just blew my mind that you could have a live, intimate, club-sized show with that kind of unharnessed energy. It just set the bar for all of us of like, that's what a concert can be. And to me, the birthday party is the Beatles of noise. Like, no two songs are the same. Everything they did was brilliant. They were this flash of energy that was around for a few years and then it ended and never really happened again. And so they're definitely a high watermark of, music for me. It's great that Nick Cave has become a superstar. I wish more people knew about, his early work, but that's often the way of things.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think actually my introduction to any sort of Nick Cave music, I think it was Murder Ballads, because we had this show in the UK called The White Room, and it
Hmm.
was mostly just live performances. And I remember they did Stagger Lee and Henry Lee with PJ Harvey. And I remember seeing them do Stagger Lee, and I didn't know who Blexa Bargold was, and I didn't know Einstürzen de Neubauten at that point. And we was doing these screams. I was like, what is this guy all about? And they're all dressed in suits as well.
Hmm.
And so I was pretty hooked from that point. And then, yeah, I went backwards and eventually found the birthday party. And yeah, they still stand up. They're one of those bands that I think it's like, it's never going to sound dated. There's just something about them.
I completely agree. Such good stuff. Yeah, I think Murder Ballads is still my favorite Nick Cave record, but I got on board. I think Tender Prey was the new one when I heard about them, but we at the time felt like that was the gentrified Nick Cave, just because the birthday party we were such fans of already. I mean, they were long gone by the time I got into them, but it was still the 80s, I think, or maybe early 90s. And I think I either had King Ink or Junkyard on a mixtape, or no, Big Cheese's Trash Can was the first song that I heard, and it was just so unlike anything else, but it was really engaging and interesting. And we were also hearing bands that were influenced by them at that time, like Killdozer and Scratch Acid,
Mm.
and it just seemed like this common DNA for so many of my favorite bands was the birthday party or the Stooges or Can, Devo. There are certain bands that just they're so inspiring that you get whole genres of music based on different aspects of what they've done.
Yeah. So, with all of those different influences swirling around, how did you, and as well considering the different bands that you'd both played in before, how did you fix on the drums, keyboard, vocals setup for the band?
Well, we wanted to be a duo, and so many duos are either guitar and drums or bass and drums, and you have this problem where there are frequencies that are missing or have to be sort of artificially input, whether you're putting a guitar through two amps. And we just thought, well, the keyboard has low end and high end, and Josh has two hands and a mouth, and he grew up playing church organ and piano. So it felt really natural to just make the duo that because we felt like we could make the most sound that way. At the same time, he doesn't have like a rack of synthesizers with all these different things. It was one keyboard through our secret weapon in the old days was a Y splitter, where it was an 1/8-inch jack that had two female ends, and you plug that into the keyboard, and then you can have two outs, one to each amp, and with two different effects chains. So you send like distortion or gain to this low end amp, so that's your bass, and then your filters and delays to the high end, that's sort of the guitar amp, and it makes a lot of sound and covers a lot of bases. And we immediately felt like we don't sound like anyone else. Like this is such a simple approach, and yet it's very novel. And we weren't interested in sounding like anyone else. And when reviews started coming out of the album that were referring to us as dance punk or electro clash or any of these other subgenres, we kind of reacted against that because we never set out to be a specific thing. To me, Point Line Plain is the sound of Josh and I playing together. We're both very omnivorous about listening to all different kinds of music. Like we love classical music, we love heavy metal, we love experimental music and, classic rock, country, classic country, whatever. We like all kinds of stuff. So there really weren't any limitations on us besides the idea that we wanted to make noisy music that had pop hooks. Like we didn't want to write pop songs, but we also felt like so many of the experimental and noise artists that we were seeing were very like sound and texture based, and we wanted to be song based. We wanted to write songs that would get stuck in your head or that you could dance to or that you would remember. And I feel like we really accomplished that, and especially playing, this first album, most of the tracks to the audiences the other night. People are moving and they're bobbing their heads and they're remembering songs that they maybe haven't heard in 20 years, and that's a very good sign.
Yeah. I was wondering, like listening to this new version of the debut record, one of my favorite tracks I would say is actually the last track, Deep Sea.
Hmm.
And I was thinking to myself, even though it's not like it's not that there's a particular melody that makes me think of one of their songs, but it makes me think of Butthole Surfers a bit from the perspective of the weirdness, the aggression, but also those pop hooks that come into it. Were they also an influence to you?
I mean, I remember being 16. I was on a road trip to Santa Cruz, California, and I was in a skate shop, and Sweat Loaf off Locust Abortion Technician came on, and it has that intro, Mommy, yes, son, what does regret mean? And then they come in with that, if you see your mom this weekend, tell her, Satan, Satan, Satan. And that appealed to me on every level at age 16. And I went home to Happy Trails Records, and they had a stack of shrink-wrapped Butthole Surfers records there. And all those records have no information on them. They just have abstract art, no song titles. And I had to guess at random. And I grabbed Locust Abortion Technician, put it home, dropped the needle on, and it was that song. And so, yeah, that's absolutely a prime influence on me for uncompromising experimental music that's totally timeless. Like they did not care what anybody thought. They were not going to be held back. There were no rules. They would take a really weird song and then slow it down to half speed and put it on the record that way. Just brilliant stuff. So, I mean, I don't know that Josh and I ever sat down and said, let's do something like Butthole Surfers, but I think it's something that we are certainly fans of, and I consider them, a crucial, foundational, independent American, rock band from that time. And so, yeah, they're definitely on that Mount Rushmore of noise bands in a certain way. That's flattering to hear. We end the set right now, the live set, with Deep Sea, because it's such a nice cool down from all the frenetic things that happened before that. We have some songs here and there that do have like a very repetitive, grooving energy to them, and we try to intersperse those throughout the set so that it's like you kind of can catch your breath and get locked into a pulse in a way that a lot of the other songs are more kind of like these thrill rides.
Yeah, so I guess maybe that might also include tracks from Smoke Signals like 1976 or DRUG. They're a bit more on the sort of spaced out atmospheric side.
I love those songs. I'm hoping we can find a way to play them as a duo because on Smoke Signals we had a second keyboardist. So the songs that we have been able to bring back so far from Smoke Signals, we've been doing Descender because Descender existed. We actually recorded Descender for the first album, but then held it back because we needed a comp track that could go out and be used promotionally. And so Descender ended up on a lot of compilations and also ended up on a split EP we did with a Portland band called The Planet The. So on the new CD of the remastered album, the bonus track is the original recording of Descender that was from those sessions.
Okay.
But because we didn't put it on the album and we loved the song and it got so much response when we played it live and we sort of regretted leaving it off the record, we re-recorded it as a trio for Smoke Signals. And then the other song that we've been doing live is The Messenger. And that is another one that, it's kind of just got a samba beat for 5 minutes the whole way through, which is very unlike the rest of the set. And so we put that in the midway point and Deep Sea at the end. And it just seems to be a really nice flow that way.
Yeah. So why did you, in fact, expand to a three-piece when you did before the second record?
I think we were feeling a little bit like we had reached a limit of what we could do as two people, just because we were so creative and we're trying to grow and change constantly. So we just thought, how can we make new and different sounds? And we were also reacting against the fact that people were trying to pigeonhole what we were doing or place us in a certain scene. And I think in retrospect, Josh and I wish we would have just ignored that impulse and just sort of continued what we were doing and evolved a little bit more naturally and gradually. Instead, we did this sort of about face where we were like, all right, let's do something completely different now. And Smoke Signals is a much more murky, industrial, krautrock inspired record. And I'm very proud of the record. I wouldn't really change anything about it, but it kind of feels like there should have been another album maybe in between those two, or maybe some of the songs that we wrote in between that we sort of abandoned could have made their way onto there, and it would have been a less jarring transition. But we also had a good buddy named Howard who was a really excellent at synthesis. He really understood how the keyboards worked and could make really amazing textures. And you hear that on a song like Bugs, or, I mean, really most of Smoke Signals has these really interesting synthesized textures to them. And anything that's not really a song part that is more like a layer is probably something he did. So in the studio, that worked out really well. But Howard didn't really enjoy touring. He didn't like playing live that much. And he's much more of an improviser and not thrilled to learn songs that have like verses and choruses. So it was somewhat short-lived. Like we recorded a lot of music with him, including the Haunters soundtrack and the demos for Smoke Signals and then Smoke Signals. But we found ourselves all of a sudden playing live a lot less, and it had a lot to do with having a third person. And so we eventually parted ways with him and got back on the road to our sort of intense schedule and figured out what songs we could do live as a duo again. And that's why when we reunited, there wasn't really any consideration of having a third person, though Howard came out to the Salem show and he's still friends with us. But I don't think he's wishing that he was a part of it because it's just not what he enjoys particularly. So
Yeah. So right at the start, when we started talking, you alluded to three albums, and you mentioned just there the Haunters soundtrack. So did this ever get released? Is this an unreleased third out? This was like a soundtrack for a ghost or haunted houses documentary or something like that.
So there, it was a friend of mine, two friends of mine had been spending years working on this documentary film about people who are so obsessed with Halloween that they either put on haunted house attractions in October or turn their yards into attractions. So it's that kind of haunted house, the sort of like handmade DIY horror haunted house that people pay $5 and go in to scream. And it's a really fun film, and so they gave us a small budget, and we went into my brother's recording studio and spent a week composing what we thought was appropriately spooky music for a haunted house film. And at the same time, we demoed the Smoke Signals album, sort of on the filmmaker's dime, and then gave them a body of music to use. And they cut the whole film together, and the music worked very well with it. But the sad part was, by the time they had finished editing the film, they were sort of exhausted and broke, and they didn't really get a chance to shop it around, and it didn't come out. So there are some DVDs floating around in a couple of hands, but so yeah, the music never came out and the movie never came out. But who knows? That might be able to change down the road.
Yeah, oh, that's a shame. I mean, having put
Yeah.
all that both for you and for them, having put all that work into it, and for it not to see the light of day.
Yeah. So I think there is an idea that we could release the soundtrack and then pop a DVD in as a bonus disc so that people could see it. I wish the movie was streaming because I think it's very entertaining. There have been other movies on that subject since then, and other movies with the same title, Haunters, that I think were a little bit of demoralizing to those guys, which is too bad. But I have to say, it was a very cool project to be a part of. We were thrilled to get to do a soundtrack, especially on that theme. And it's an actually very entertaining, well-made, independent, low-budget feature.
All right. Well, that's tantalizing. Hopefully, there will be an opportunity for me to see it in the not too distant future. I know that originally the self-titled record didn't come out on SKiN GRAFT Records, but then you signed with them, I think, for Smoke Signals, and obviously they're putting out the reissue. How did the relationship with SKiN GRAFT come about?
So the first record was released as a joint effort between two micro labels, one in Seattle called Zeroid and one in Portland called Sincere Brutality. And Eric from Zeroid just came to the Seattle show last week, and James from Sincere Brutality came to the Portland show. So it was very cool to see them and reconnect with them. Mookie, who produced the first album, came to the Portland show, even
Oh, that's
holding
really
his
cool.
holding his oxygen tank, like that kind of dedication. Eric, who designed the artwork and the music video, came to the Portland show. So it's like very much a reunion of all these talents. We were gigging constantly and touring a lot and getting a lot of really cool press at the time, and looking for a label, to kind of step it up to have a little bit more of a professional partner. And SKiN GRAFT was the one label that responded and said, "Wow, I see how hard you're working. I love the music, and I would like to work with you on a new album." And I don't think Smoke Signals was probably what he was expecting from us, but I also don't think that a label like SKiN GRAFT ever expects anything specific because they work with such experimental artists. And he was very encouraging, and that record comes with a poster fold out in the CD that's like, I don't know, 16 panels or something. It's the largest poster fold out he'd ever done. And in fact, the first pressing of it was on too thick of paper, and it wouldn't even fit in the jewel case, and they had to be reprinted on like thinner stock. But yeah, we just reached out to Mark, and he was open to it and sent us a small budget to make a record. And unfortunately, we folded pretty shortly after that, and I always felt bad that we weren't able to, kind of work harder and, help him break even on his investment. And so 21 years later, he actually had hit us up at some point wondering about reissuing the Blue album. And at the time, I thought, well, I don't know that it's good timing. We're not active. I don't know, that it would be worth your while to do that. And then, of course, when the reunion happened, I immediately got in touch, and he was like, yes, let's do it. It's never been on vinyl. That needs to happen. And I got the test pressing a couple of weeks ago, and I think it sounds better on vinyl than it has ever sounded on CD. And I was always proud of the sound of that record, but getting to go back to the original recordings and having it professionally mastered, I just think it's in its final form now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I haven't heard the original CD version, but it does definitely sound great. Like I think on a track like Crystal Skeleton,
Mhm.
I really like the spaciousness of the drums and the it's like you can really feel the textures of the synths. In fact, does Josh play an organ on
It
some of these tracks, or it's like an organ effect through a synth?
I think it's a synthesizer for sure, run through effects pedals. I am trying to remember which synth he had during the first album because I think it was technically an organ, but like an electric organ that he found in a dumpster. Um, and
Nice.
we talked about eventually sacrificing it with a chainsaw at a concert, but it was made out of metal, and I was a little bit worried someone would get some shrapnel in their eye or something. So we avoided hurting anyone. But I'm pretty sure that was, I don't remember the brand, I'd have to ask him, but I think it was a cheap electric organ, but it was made out of metal. But the sound, the spaciousness that you're hearing, because we had basically no budget to make that first record, and it was going to be recorded by Mookie using this digital hard drive system that he had, I wanted to give it some warmth and character. And the way that I thought to do that was we rented this big wooden hall. It was an art gallery space called the Disjecta. And they had nighttime events, but they let us rent it during the day for 3 afternoons. And I had seen this music documentary on David Bowie and the recording of the Heroes album, and they showed how he had a mic, three different sets of microphones with gates on them, and he had a close mic for when he was kind of whispering and talking, and then 10 feet away was a microphone that the gate would open up when he sang a little bit louder, and then they had another mic that was like 30 feet away for when he really belted it out and wailed, and so the reverb was totally natural because it was the sound of this room and these mics that were at a distance. So we did that for the drums in the Disjecta. And during the fast, punchy, hardcore parts, that's just the mics that are on the drums. And then during a lot of mid-tempo sections, we bring in the room mics that are a little further away. And then during that circusy, slow part in Crystal Skeleton you mentioned, that's the sound of those mics opening up, being mixed in from like 60 feet away in this big wooden hall. And I think it was a really effective, and cost-effective solution. And it gives that album like a real character that it wouldn't have otherwise. And I'm really, really happy about that.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, that's a very intriguing method. And yeah, it definitely gives it character.
Well, thanks for hearing it and noticing.
So, in terms of the new version of the Blue album that's coming out, so what work was done to it? Like, what was the process of getting these files and then creating the version that people are going to hear?
Well, first off, I mean, Mookie's health is not great, and he was in the hospital when I first contacted him, but he ended up going out to his garage and plugging in old computers and old hard drives and finding the best final mixes of the songs that he could prior to the mastering stage. Because at that time, we could not afford mastering. So he ended up mastering it for us. And he did an excellent job, but it is generally preferred to not have the engineer who recorded the album master it. Sending it to a fresh set of ears and someone who specifically has the equipment and experience to master an album is a preferred process that we couldn't afford back then. So that was something that, I just kind of went out of pocket personally saying, we're putting this record out. It needs to be kind of done right and done finally. And so we had Mookie prepare those files for us. He had everything in its final form except Deep C was in some kind of other mix state. So he went in and did some minor tweaking to get it to sound like as close to the original as he could. And then we took that and sent it down to Justin Weiss in San Francisco, who I've worked with on a whole bunch of records. He has a company called Trackworks, and he ended up doing the master for us. And the very first master he sent back was very aggressive, and he was, I hadn't given him any notes. I just wanted to see what he would do. And he ended up cleaning it up too much to the point where there was like bits of feedback that were missing, and like the drums sounded incredible and the vocals sounded really in your face, but the noise and the grit of the keyboards had sort of been stripped away. And I totally understand where he was coming from, and it's probably what a lot of bands or guitar-based bands would want, is to sort of clean up and focus the sound. But I had to call him and say, look, man, I love you and you're brilliant, but this is a noise band. And even if we have to sacrifice some of those beautiful drum tones, we can't clean it up that much. Like, I want it to sound bigger and better than it did, but it's really important that that feedback and noise and grit is in there. And he was like, oh, okay, I see where you're coming from. And so he sent us another version. I was like, yeah, that's what we want. And so that's what you're hearing. So it really did go through a bit of a painstaking process to be where it is. And there are aspects of the original master. There's a certain murkiness to it and low end that I love and I kind of miss, but I also think it was necessary in order to get the clarity and the punch and the presence that we ended up with. So, this is a lot of inside baseball stuff, but what I can say is a lot of care was taken to make it sound as good as it possibly could based on a very no budget recording from 2003.
Yeah, no, those are really interesting insights. I'm going to let you get away soon, but I was curious to ask you something because I saw in your signature when we emailed back and forth that you have a booking agency, I guess.
Yeah.
Nanotear Booking?
It's funny, the name Nanotear actually came about. Josh came up with that name while we were on a tour, one of our last tours as Point Line Plain. Because we had been booking our own tours, we talked about maybe starting an agency. And separate from that, he talked about, oh, I cry a nanotear. It's a billionth of a teardrop. And it's sort of a mantra that over the last 20 some years running an agency, I try to remind myself every day, like, problems arise and there's stress involved with booking tours. And I try to remind myself, like, just cry a nanotear and move on. It's not that big of a deal. Nobody's life is at stake. I'm not a surgeon. I'm booking tours for people. And so, yeah, I had a career prior to that doing 2D and 3D computer animation, and it paid well, but it was really kind of dull work, and I was in a cubicle for long hours, and I kept getting offered these salaried jobs, and I'd say, well, I need 30 days unpaid a year that I can go tour, and no one wanted to give me a salary and a month away. So I said, well, then that's not in the cards for me because I'm a touring musician and I'm going to continue to need that sort of flexibility and autonomy. And so I started the Nanotear Booking Agency in 2004. And I still have some of the same clients that I have that first week, like bands like Yob and Acid King are still with me. Jarbo, Amber Asylum, yes. And over 20 plus years, it's grown into a full-time job, and I work with amazing artists from all around the world, and it's nice to be my own boss, and it's nice to know that I get up in the morning and my job is to make sure that artists are taken care of and to kind of stimulate this independent musical ecosystem that we have. And there is a fringe benefit that a lot of opportunities come through my net. And sometimes if none of them are appropriate for my clients, they kind of get handed down to my personal bands. And the fact that I started working with Dazzling Killmen, who had just reunited at the same time that Point Line Plain reunited, that just came about because we were label mates, and Nick from Dazzling Killmen was like, "Oh, I love Point Line Plain. I never saw you live, but I listened to that record, Smoke Signals record, a lot. And I love you guys." And I said, "Well, you want to come to the West Coast exactly when I'm already scheduling our reunion shows. So, we could just combine forces on that." And so that's what ended up happening. But yeah, that's my business is Nanotear Booking. And if you go to nanotear.com, you can see all the artists that I work with. And
Mm.
I'm really proud because the goal 20 some years ago was to get to a place where I had a reputation that I only work with the absolute best bands. And that if I write to a promoter and say, "Hey, I just picked up this new artist you might not be familiar with," that they would say, "Well, they're with Nanotear, they must be amazing. And I'm definitely at that place now, so it feels good.
Yeah, that's really cool. Looking through your roster, I've interviewed half a dozen people, including Gerbo. And when I was talking to her, because she's coming to Europe, in fact, I guess she's already in Europe. I'm going to see her in London on Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday. And I discovered through the interview with her that when she tours in Europe, she tours with Swamp Booking.
Yep,
And I ended up interviewing Riccardo Biondetti from Swamp Booking for something else. And so that was interesting to get his insights as a booking agent. So presumably, I'm guessing that what you're doing is all North American based, or is it?
that's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah, I have been asked many times about Europe, and I just feel like I want to leave that to the experts. Like, I am an expert on North American booking, and I'm very much not an expert in Europe, even though I've been over there a number of times, and I love to go there as an artist or as a, speaking on panels or whatever it is, DJing. But I think it would be unfair to my clients to try to represent them in a territory where I'm just not a true expert. And Ricky is. And I love how many bands we share together. There's a lot of bands that are with Swamp in Europe and Nanotear in the US. And I think those bands have it pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. Talking to him and getting to learn about the history of Swamp Booking, it sounds like it took a long time to build up the contacts and the different aspects of what they could to draw from for the tours. So yeah, it doesn't sound like something you could just very quickly go like, right, I'm going to book European tours.
No, for sure. And, even in the US for me, the first 10 years at least, I was DJing 3 or 4 nights a week and writing for magazines and had a lot of side hustles going on. And it's really just, I don't know, I guess in the last 10 years or so that I finally kind of realized a lot of those other things were taking time away from work and personal projects. And there's enough going on with the agency to keep me busy, especially with being a touring musician and also being a published author. Like, I've got plenty going on, so those DJ gigs aren't happening anymore, and I don't do much journalism anymore. I'm, pretty much focused on writing fiction and being an agent and being a musician, and that's plenty.
Sounds like a pretty cool combination to me.
It's a blast. So,
So my intention is I'm going to put this out a couple of days before the album comes out. At that point, at the end of May, what's on the horizon for you, whether for Point Line Plain or elsewhere that you want to mention?
well, the first weekend of June, we are flying to the Midwest to meet up with Dazzling Killmen again for 3 shows in their territory, which will be Chicago and Madison, and then the Caterwall Music. I think
Ah, oh,
they
of
don't like to
course,
call it a
that's right.
festival. I'm trying to remember what word they like. But anyway, Caterwall is a 3-day event in Minneapolis that's focused on noise rock, and that's one area where we fit amongst many. And they, luckily, the organizers of Caterwall had seen Point Line playing back in the day and were familiar with us as people and an entity. And we're happy. I think a festival like that likes to have reunions, artists to playing their stage. So we were, along with Dazzling Killmen, like the first 2 bands that were announced for Caterwall this year, and that's been helpful for our profile. Because a big challenge that we have with Point Line Plain, this is certainly not like we're not really able to cash in on the reunion. This is like we playing together again because we want to. Point Line Plain had a lot of press and momentum 25 years ago, where we're in the Wire magazine, we're in the Village Voice, we're in alternative press. John Peel played us on his show, but that's all ephemeral stuff that's gone. Like by folding in 2005, when MySpace was in its infancy, there isn't a digital footprint of Point Line Plain. You don't find all this information about us online, except for the kind bloggers and podcasters and magazines of the last like 60 days that have been interested to check us out, which is really great. So there's a lot of new information and we're able to tell our story. But considering the amount of press and attention we did have back then, like that's all just
Mm.
in my file cabinet now.
Yeah, it is such an interesting phenomenon, the way that I'm sure for a lot of people, whether it's for music or whether it's writing, you sort of can fall into this trap of thinking like everything's on the internet. But of course, there are millions of things which aren't. And if you
Yep.
live your life just thinking about what's on the internet, there's a lot that you're going to miss.
Yep. Got to have a library card.
Indeed. Well, Nathan, thank you so much for joining me to tell a little bit of your story. And yeah, enjoy Caterwall, enjoy the shows with Dazzling Killman. Say hi to Nick and Blake from me. I've interviewed them both down the line, and yeah, I hope you get a great reception for the record when it comes out again. And yeah, until next time.
You bet. Thanks for the great interview. I really appreciate it.